Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Giants Weekly, where we learn from giants in the tech and startup universe together every Tuesday. My name is Tip. I'm part of the Blackbird team, and today we have the one and only Rachael Tough Love Neumann, partner at Startmate, head of startups at AWS, and previously managing director of Eventbrite. Thank you for joining us today, Rachael.
Thanks so much, Tip, and thanks for everyone for giving up some time on your morning to chat customer and product. So as Tip said, during the day, I help keep many of you guys up and running on the AWS cloud. I'm also investing in a bunch of early stage startups as an angel, but at all times, I'm obsessing over customers and trying to translate their pain into products that they use and love. So why are we even taking on this topic today? Many of you guys are running companies and you care about growth, whether that's revenue or customers or new geographies, you want to grow this company. There are some of you that also might be thinking about getting costs down, especially right now in the conditions that we're in. Now, there's something pretty magical that if you happen to do them at the same time, we get the holy grail. That's called profits. And there's actually this little trick that we can do to help your growth go up, help your costs go down without negatively impacting each other. And that's actually through hearing from your customers. Now, I know that many of you are doing this or thinking that you're doing this already. And if you are, that's great. But there is a little bit of a nuance between listening to your customers and hearing them. And so I want to take you through a few tips that I've learned in my work in doing this, and maybe just share some data for why you might want to do this. And that's companies who do it really well. They grow faster and at lower cost. So they grow 2 times the compounded annual growth rate of their competitors at 15% lower costs. So if you think about how you might want to stack up against your competitors, certainly if you're having a conversation with an investor, this type of data is pretty high impact. So 3 hot tips. There's obviously a much longer conversation around how we can do this. And that won't be totally tackled in the 30 minutes we have together, but there are many trials and tribulations through trials and tribulations, many things that I've learned. And so I'll just share 3 of them with you. And the idea is that this is just meant to be a taster. Just get a little taste. Hopefully this will pique a much bigger burning desire and interest in yourself to go deep on this topic. So the first one, customers are terrible product designers. Now you probably thought as someone who is customer obsessed that I'd be saying something nice about them. I'm sorry, but it's true. They are terrible at designing your products. So there is the often overused Henry Ford quote where he said if he had asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I think we know now that Henry Ford didn't say this quote at all, but it still drives home for me the fact that if you listen to what your customers say verbatim, you're going to end up building some really funky products that, lo and behold, they won't end up using. So you need to inextricably link what your customers are saying to your product roadmap. But unfortunately, it's not just as easy as taking it on face value. There's a translation process. Now, the translation process is where the art and the science of customer data come together. And really, it boils down to empathy. And empathy is understanding that when your customer says, I want A, what she's really saying is, I have a pain that I'm trying to solve. And what are the different ways in which you can solve those things? So when they say, I want a red button in the corner of the website, what they're saying is right now, I don't know what the call to action is. And it would be really helpful if you make it very clear what I have to do next. And so this is the translation process that needs to happen. I'll bring it home with a real example from my work when I had just started off as Director of Customer Experience Strategy at Eventbrite. So it was, my first week on the job, and I was super keen to be, power to the people, get the customer feedback into the product roadmap. And so I looked at the data and I kept saying, what are customers asking for time and time again? And they kept asking for shopping cart. I guess we'd call it shopping trolley here. So you know what shopping cart is. That is, in any sort of e-commerce setting, that is where you stuff things with items that you intend to buy, whether they're events or t-shirts or face masks, and then you transact all at once. So first of all, I went to Product and Eng and I said, what are you doing? 52 weeks in a row, our customers have been asking for shopping cart. Why haven't you built shopping cart? And I don't know if any of you guys have ever had conversations walking across the floor to product and eng, asking them to build something, but they're just like, please don't ask us to do this. And it turns out that building shopping cart is actually very complex technically. This is kind of back in the day. It touched a bunch of our different parts of our technology and actually exposed a bunch of technical debt. So they said, Rachel, we'll do anything for you except build shopping cart. So I said, okay, before I throw all of my chips against this one fight and make some, potential enemies in the first week of my new job, let me just talk to some customers and understand what they're doing when they say that they want shopping cart. So I actually just called a bunch and I asked if I could hang out with them and watch them use the site. And so it turns out is that we had a bunch of users at Eventbrite that every Thursday would start to think about their weekend and they'd say, what's on Friday? And they'd find a cool event to go to. And then they'd want to know what's on Saturday. And then if they're super hardcore, they'd want to know what's going on Sunday afternoon. And so what they were actually just telling me, I know this sounds very obvious now, is they were just saying, Rachel, there are 3 events that I want to buy tickets to, and I don't want to fill out my information and go through the checkout flow each and every time. So all of a sudden, they said shopping cart. What they were really saying is, can you make it super easy for me to go to lots of events over a weekend without typing in all of my name, information, address? And so now I could go to product and eng and say, this is the pain that they're trying to solve. What are the range of possibilities? And you can, again, this was a while ago, but you now know what those could be. That could be a one-click purchase. We can create a shadow account the first time they log on and save a bunch of information in their fields. We can actually drop fields from the checkout flow so that they are checking out more quickly. And one of the things, just a side note, that we know about shopping cart, and we're going to touch upon this in a moment, is that shopping cart as a feature is pretty terrible, because I'm sure many of you guys have internet browsers open right now with some e-com site where you've stuffed the shopping cart of things to buy, and then you either forget to transact or you think you'll get to it later. And spoiler alert, you probably never will. So by actually digging deeper into the customer problem, not only was I able to come up with a solution that met their needs, and in this case, we created shadow accounts, allowed them to authenticate the second time they're in, we saved a bunch of their information, and we reduced the number of fields. By doing that, we introduced a slight amount of fraud to the process, but it definitely made up for it in the volume of transactions and in the increased conversion rate that we knew that shopping cart would have killed for us. So this is one of the stories that I'll share with you where I was actually successful. I have plenty more where I have tried and failed, but it's the process that matters. So the main takeaway on this first point is just look for the pain, not what they tell you they want. So always ask yourself, why are they asking for this? What are they doing in this moment? What is their psychological or emotional state at this moment, or before or after? What is it that they really need? And just start to peel that onion until you understand the core of the customer problem that you're actually solving there. The second hot tip is that customers are liars. Again, sorry, customers are my most favorite people, but it's true. And it's not because we're bad people. We actually don't mean to lie, but just take a look at my New Year's resolutions. And I imagine many of them are very similar for you. We all have the best intentions of what our future is going to look like. And it actually comes from a beautiful place, right? It comes from us being super optimistic around how our behavior tomorrow is actually going to be pretty different than our behavior yesterday. And unfortunately, most of our New Year's resolutions end up looking a lot like this. And that is, we have very large or medium-sized intentions, and at best, very small behavior changes. So what does this mean if you're trying to design product? Because everyone always says you want to listen to your customer as much as possible, but if they're liars, what do you do about this? The reason this happens is something called the intention behavior gap. And the intention behavior gap is, as I mentioned, it's having very big ideas of what your future behavior is going to be, but actually we as humans change very infrequently. And what's interesting about this intention behavior gap, this is for the statistical nerds amongst us, these are scatter plots just showing our values of correlation. And when we look at intention and behavior, on average, they have a correlation R value of just 0.03, which is weak correlation. So in other words, what you say you're going to do and what you're going to do does not compute. And what I read an interesting article recently, and it said that consumer behavior is the most unstable and unpredictable part of the supply chain. And so you want to get really good at trying to either anticipate or know how your consumers are going to behave. But we know that, again, we are accidental liars. And I'm going to use this one example here, and that is in organic food, sustainable products, kind of better for you, better for the planet options. Now, there was a research done by Carrington and his team and Young and team in 2010 that actually looked at this specific behavior, and 30 to 50% of consumers across a number of studies said that when given the choice, they would choose the organic, better for you, better for planet option. But the data actually shows us that these products have less than a 5% market share. So there's definitely a gap between what we say we're going to do and what we're going to do. And so my advice here is, if you're going to be launching a new product or a new service, don't ask your customers, are you going to do X, Y, and Z? If it's a behavior that they've done before, you need to say, tell me a time when you have done X, Y, and Z. So a great example might be, hey, Rachel, are you going to go to the gym this week? And of course, I would say, absolutely, I'm going to the gym this week. But maybe you want to say, Rachel, can you show us your diary and show us when did you go to the gym last week? And you would get, unfortunately, a very different set of data. So my tip here is, if your customers have done this type of purchasing, this type of behavior, this type of motion before, ask for behavioral data, evidence of when it has been done. If you're asking them to do something completely new or novel, then what you want to do is just run as small of an experiment as possible to start to prove out that they have that behavior is already innate, that they're willing to perform something, and ideally that they're willing to pay. So my takeaway here is, run experiments to prove that there's a need and a want, and then in parentheses, ideally a willingness to pay if that's something that you're into, if revenue is something you're into. And don't bet the farm on best intentions. At Amazon, we say best intentions are where great ideas go to die. And so you really want to try and root what you're doing as much in actual data that you have seen happen before, or that you're able to observe going forward. The last thing is that this is a muscle that needs to be exercised, and systems and speed are key here. And so if we stick with this gym analogy, unfortunately, this is not a set it and forget it. You don't get to work out once and enjoy the fitness that comes of it for the rest of your life. In fact, you have to create a system. And unfortunately, the system has to spin many, many, many times over, and it needs to constantly be iterated. The good news is there are lots of different systems that I've worked with, ranging from the simple to the complex, and I have lots of ideas and data on which ones are most effective. But what I care right now is that everyone here just at least gets started. And you can get started with 3 simple steps. One is find out some sort of mechanism to hear your customers. And that can be whether you actually pick up the phone, whether you are observing them, whether you ask them, an NPS survey that Ask Nicely has sent out. The point is that you're creating some sort of data of inputs of customers telling you what they think and feel. Then you actually need to change something. So you need to say, okay, they think this. What are some of the levers I have to pull to change that experience? Let me just run an experiment in changing that, and then you measure it. So you say, this is the problem. I've made a small change. Has that change impacted my customers' happiness, their satisfaction, my revenue, their willingness to promote my product to friends and family? The point is that this needs to be rinsed and repeated over and over and over, and across a number of different points that you're looking to measure. And again, I'm agnostic as to what system you use. What I care about is that you start putting in some sort of process. You get everyone on the team across this, and then you're working together to constantly be looking at this. Now, bonus points is something that we call closed feedback loops, which is when you actually tell your customer, hey, you know how you asked for shopping cart? I just want to tell you that that was really awesome and that helped us to understand what you're trying to do. We actually didn't build shopping cart. What we built was, you'll see now that when you sign on, you have an account. We've taken a bunch of fields away and we're trying to make your checkout flow as simple as possible. Thank you so much for helping us build our product. Nothing makes human beings and customers feel like they're part of the team and have a real affinity for your company and your product as you telling them, hey, you said this, we listened, we changed, and thank you so much. And sometimes you have to, buck up and have the hard conversations when you say, I know that you're asking for this. We are actually not going to do it because of this, but thank you so much for being part of it. When you're able to close that feedback loop, you're just creating an intimacy with your customer that says, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you, and we're in this together. Now, lots of people tell me that they sometimes get overloaded with data. If they're doing those systems right and they're capturing inputs from all different places, they're like, where do I even start? So these are just two simple tools that I use pretty frequently. You can use them independently, you can use them together. And the first one is a simple 2x2. I'm a former consultant, a recovering management consultant. So I love a good 2x2. And I usually just look at customer emotion on one axis and customer impact on the other. And you look at high and low. And you start to take, a part of the experience. And you say, if I get this right or wrong, how emotionally attached in this moment is my customer? And you plot it across that axis. And then you say, if I get this right or wrong, how much will this impact the customer? Is this a mission critical step to what they're trying to achieve? Or is this kind of a nice to have part of the process? And you plot that out. And then because I love to throw a third dimension in, I usually will just change the bubble size based on the number of customers this is likely to impact. Now, the most important place for people usually to start is in that upper right corner where it's high customer impact and high emotion if you get it right or wrong. But there might be other areas that you want to prioritize, in particular if the customer population size that's impacted is varied. But this is just a good quadrant for you to, or a good 2x2 for you to map things to quadrants. And at the very least, it's causing you to have a robust conversation with your team to say, what are we going to do now? And then after, what will come next? And it's just great to prioritize. Another thing that I often do is then I map it to the customer journey. So if I take a customer journey and you kind of map it out step by step, and you start to think about where do these moments plot against that journey, this is where you can really get into the emotional and psychological state of your customer and say, what is she thinking and doing every step of the way? And therefore, where are our priority moments because of the things that either he or she is thinking and doing, or the things he or she, we want them to think or do. Now, for many products and companies, those early steps are really important because that's when we meet our customer for the first time and we're able to build a relationship. But likewise, an important step might be the moment before you're asking them to do something either difficult, and so you want to make sure that they are in a nice, elated, emotional state. Maybe just before you're asking them to part with their well-earned money and actually make a transaction. The last thing that you want to do is cause a customer pain just before you then say, hey, can you put in your credit card details? That's a pretty surefire way that you are not going to get the transaction. So these are just two tools, and you can play with them as you want, but the idea is that when you get if you're doing this well and you have a bunch of customer data, there should be some sort of prioritization exercise. And at the very least, the conversation creates a rigor around what do you think really matters for both your customer and your business and why. So Professor Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School, who actually recently passed away, he says, when we buy a product, we essentially hire it to help us do a job. If it does the job well, when we're confronted with the same job, we'll hire that product again. If it does a crummy job, we fire it and we look for an alternative. This is just a reminder that of two things. One, the product or service that you're putting out there, it might be good right now, but your customers are going to constantly be hiring it over and over and over again. And if it is not meeting their needs, and one of the things we know is that our customer needs are changing faster and I think more dramatically than ever before, they're going to fire your product. And so this is a reminder of why we need this system, because what got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. I was talking about changing customer behavior. Here's an example that I love from retail. So that first column in the orange is what customers want. And they want everything, right? You want super local, same day shipping. You want to be able to collect it, set the time for delivery. Your expectations as consumers actually far outstrip what most of your retailers are providing. And then here's the kicker. You want everything, but you don't necessarily want to pay for it. So this is just a reminder that our customers are constantly going to be demanding more and more from us. And so the way that we up our game is to continue to build those cycles. So starting from number one, we don't ask our customers to design our products for us. We ask them to show us their pain. Two, we don't take it for granted what they say they're going to do. We look for evidence of when they've done it before, or we run experiments to observe their behavior. And third is we are constantly exercising this over and over. Oh, I actually summarized. Here's the slide again. Customers are not product designers. That's your job. They lie, but they can't help it. And this is a journey, not a destination. So everyone, if you're not already doing it, make sure that you're starting that now. Tip, I think we are at the question part of the session.
Thank you, Rachel. That was brilliant. Show us the pain. I love it. Okay, let's launch into Q&A. First question, Benjamin Kennedy asked, we ask our customers how we can improve and they say, oh no, everything's good, but they won't transact again. What's the best way to encourage people to give us honest feedback that will help us improve?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, never ask your mom for feedback because she's usually not a good predictor of what the actual customer pain is. So this is where we use observation techniques. So I use a framework called watch, do, ask, where you don't ask them, how is everything? There's kind of leading questions implicit in that, or you say, how is that feature, right? So instead you say, do you mind if I watch you? And you can either watch in person or virtually, or you're watching by looking at click data through the site, but you're observing how they're using the product. Then you do it yourself. You say, oh, if I was in his shoes, let me, I'll do it. And then you start to feel the actual pain and you have a ton of empathy for it. And then you go back to your customer and you say, I actually saw that you got, you kept getting hiccups on this part of the process. And then I did it. And you're right, it really sucks. Can I ask you some more questions about that? And so that's a way for you to get really targeted in asking the right questions. And it's coming from a place where you actually understand because you actually walked a few steps in their shoes. And so that's a good framework for observation. And I have a bunch of really great stories. The iPhone is one of them, where when they asked, what are your pain points? Users were talking about, things with organizing their tiles or, different features. And then when you actually observed, you saw that every user was getting stuck just trying to get into their phone, and typing in the passcode was a huge pain point. Sometimes our pain points become so innate that we actually forget to say, oh, this really sucks. I'm feeling a lot of pain. So by observing, we actually saw that people were getting, stuck on the passcode. And that's where the thumbprint advent came from. And now it's obviously Face ID. So observing rather than asking is kind of the gold standard where possible.
Awesome. And Peter Long had a similar question asking around, since you need to watch and ask why during the process to uncover the true pain versus what they're really asking for, how do you scale this meaningfully, or do you actually need to get it, the feedback from one-on-ones?
Yeah, so like I said, the best you can do is actually stand shoulder to shoulder with your customer and watch what they're doing. At scale, there's obviously a lot of technology if you have a digital product that you can manage. And then the other thing is sample size, right? So you don't need to get feedback from all of your customers. At Eventbrite, we had millions and millions of customers, but I looked for both quantitative and qualitative data from a sample. You want to make sure that it's representative. And then that's where you start. So you get a big sample size, and that's going to be usually quite quantitative. That will identify where you think there's a problem, and then you can deep dive into that and have some of that more kind of subscale interactions.
There's a few questions on the customer journey roadmap. Can you give us some examples of the touch points throughout that journey? For example, what does the first touch point with the customer look like? What are some examples around that we can start building the relationship so that we can grow with the customer over time?
Yeah, I'll bring this to life with an example. I was working with a telco a few years ago, And one of the things we did was we mapped out their customer journey, and then I got customer feedback through NPS at each point in that journey. And it was pretty damning. There aren't many people that absolutely love their telco. But one of the most critical insights that we got by taking customer feedback and mapping it to the journey was we found that one of the most painful moments was receiving your modem or your router in the mail and then trying to get set up. So remember the flow was they had just selected a company that was pretty easy. They signed up, they paid for it. And then all of a sudden it's time to like get started and to meet the product. And it is literally the worst experience in the world. And when we saw this insight, we said, oh my God, it's no wonder that everyone hates telco companies, because the moment where we're meant to delight them is actually the moment where we cause them the most pain. And so even though there are tons of pain points throughout the rest of the journey with customer service, with moving or changing your address, they actually said, let's just put all hands on deck and solve this problem, because we will never have any goodwill in the system if we don't get that experience right. And so there are lots of interesting experiments that we ran around the minute you sign up, you get a dongle that you can plug in and you get internet. So look, while you're waiting for the router to arrive or while you're fiddling, because we know that it's complicated, we just want to make sure you're online, because what you care about is just that you have the internet. So there are lots of different things. And for every company, this is different, but the exercise you need to go through is you map out your journey and you figure out what are those moments that matter for us and prioritize those.
Awesome. From your experience, what's been examples of good mechanisms to hear your customers that might seem a bit underrated?
So listen, I was brought up in the NPS school of hard knocks. So in my Bain life, I was one of the NPS experts. And I think it's really powerful because, one, there's a quantitative question, which is how likely are you to recommend on a 0 to 10? It then has a qualitative attribute, which is why did you give that answer? So when you look at the quant data, you can dive down and actually figure out what are the drivers of promotion and detraction. And one of the reasons I like that score is because it empirically is proven to link to 3 customer behaviors. And so what we know, when Bain had picked what was the customer support question they wanted to put forward, they actually tested, I think something like 70 or 80 questions. And what they found was this question had, if you gave either a 0 to 6, a 7 or an 8, or a 9 to 10, you empirically had different behavior around whether you're going to stay longer, spend more, and tell others. So I like systems that have empirical evidence behind it that shows that if you are in bucket A, B, or C, you actually have very different behavior. But I'm agnostic. I don't care if you use CSAT or some other program, as long as you know that if they fall into one segment or another, they're actually going to have a different behavior change. Therefore, you'll want to migrate them out of one bucket that does bad behavior or the behavior you don't want into the bucket where they have behavior that you do want.
Cool. I think we have time for 1 or 2 last questions. The next question is, during your time as a Startmate mentor, can you give an example of an early stage founder who got customer centricity right in their product design, and what was their journey like for them?
Yeah. I'll call out the Muso guys, and I'll tell you what they did right and what they did wrong. So they were noobs. They had never designed product before. They had outsourced the development of their early product to a team, and they were basically building the Taj Mahal. So they had this idea of what the product they needed, all the bells and whistles, and they were literally betting the farm, pumping money, time, and energy into building this product. And the truth is that some people are just really good at knowing customer needs. And Brandon, Jeremiah, and Alan are uniquely qualified to know their customer needs because they are a musician, a venue booker, and Jeremiah just understands human nature and therefore the sales process. And so it was actually amazing to help them to think about some of these techniques and to use some of the innate qualities and kind of the unfair advantages that they already had about intimately knowing the customer problem to actually inform the product build. And once they were able to do that, they were able to get their product to market very quickly. And the iterations that they're doing are super, super conscientious and mindful of what are the things that customers need because of the pain that they are experiencing. And so they know that intimately from firsthand, but also they are hardcore with their customers at all times, getting that feedback and putting it into their product.
Love it. I love the Muso, guys. That's awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your infinite pearls of wisdom on building customer-centric product. It's a pleasure to learn with you as always.
Yep. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks. And everyone, thanks for tuning in. Next Tuesday, you cannot miss the crash course on the do's and don'ts of pitches with Startmate CEO Michael Batko, who will share insights from the hundreds of pitches he's coached. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and have a great one. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye.